I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain when you awaken in the morning's hush. I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry, I am not there, I did not die. Mary Elizabeth Fry. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Awaken the World. It is Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you are here live in the Awaken the World group tonight. Questions on death, live Q&A session and discussion. Hello, hello, hello. So Kelly's going to actually respond to the comments because I don't get to see them, and she will also relay any questions to me. We do have a couple of questions that have been left in the comments we're going to get to shortly, as we're, right on time, as I really do like to be. We're going to just sort of give things a minute. And make sure that everything's working properly and that everyone can hear me and see me and there's no issues. And sooner or later, Kelly will give me a thumbs up and let me know that from her end as well, as she's beside me. So first and foremost, of course, if you're not aware of who I am, my name is Garen Avalokiteshvara, and that's who, there's a really long story behind that. Let's just say I am that and I am nothing of that. And yet I am that, and I'm not that. Some of you have a little closer idea. Some of you are still kind of figuring it out. It's okay, right? The thing I want you to know is I love you from the depth of my being. Every single one of you. Why? Because you're all part of me. All of you. And I am part of you, and we are part of this magnificent one. And it is our oneness that carries us through all things, the recognition of our oneness, the speaking out and the awareness of our oneness. Imagine the problems, puzzles we would solve should we all realize our oneness together. That aside, what's a big topic that's been on everyone's mind, and it's been kind of thrust into the limelight by this COVID-19 pandemic, and that, of course, is the concept of death. Now, in this case, I have lots of personal experience. Really, I'm not kidding you. But to talk accurately about death, we need to quickly just cover over a couple things so that we're all on the same page. So, first of all, let's understand that death is just a word. Okay, I don't want you to put anything on it for now. I just want you to understand that it's just a label. And like any other label, it's only what you're going to think about that label and put on that label that's going to do anything. And the label isn't really anything real, it's just a label, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, let's take a really quick look again at reincarnation, because this is one of the most misunderstood concepts in history, I swear. So, and I see so many people fall into this ridiculous ego trap over this. They're sitting there in this particular existence, somehow thinking that this particular identity that they are today, Sarah, Joe, Frank, George, whatever, is the penultimate one that has had all the other life experiences. That's not how it works. Just as you are part of one manifestation of humanity, an individuated component of it, and yet complete and whole as the whole is, literally that projection, the same as all creation is projecting itself into each of its myriad forms, all of them still in a holographic universe containing that same whole, complete, all of it, in each and every shard. The you that is manifesting all the different egoic consciousnesses throughout history, and we're not even going to get into the time issue right now because we don't have time. But there is no time. So theoretically, we have lots of time. In short, the idea that you've had past lives is a big mistake too, okay, because there is no past and there is no future. The reason why we can have access to various lives that we're participating in as our own individuated egoic self is because they're all actually happening right now in this present moment. But I don't want to spin people's heads too far off base. So we're going to stick with just understanding that when we're speaking about reincarnation, we are not talking about the egoic identity in this life as being the one who was experiencing the last life, because it's not. It's that underlying, unchanging you. That thread I talked about, if you would, one time, or a short time ago in another video, sorry, or on a post. The you that has never changed, no matter how many times you've changed from child to adult. You've always had this sense of you, and that you, if you look at it closely, has never changed. It's also kind of ephemeral. You can't hold on to it. Why? Because it's a larger thing than you. That's what's having the multiple egoic experiences. So you need to keep that in mind. And now, ta-da, 6 minutes later, Garen's finally going to start talking about death. So, and perhaps this is the best way to begin, is in the moment it happens. Okay, our world is having to face this more and more. People all over the planet are suffering in the face of death. There's a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, a lot of drama. First and foremost, it's perfectly okay. It really is. And we are going to get to the questions. So I can tell you from personal experience that the transition from life to death is literally like one thought to the next minute. 1 minute you're physical and the next minute you're not so physical. But there isn't any like closing your eyes and there's this big period of blackness and then suddenly it's not blackness. That's not how it happens. And what happens is the higher self that you are is literally removing its attention from the vehicle it had just manifested, at which you would call your birth, to carry out a list of experiences that it hoped to take part in as part of its looking upon all of creation and growing in its own perfection through the recognition of itself in all these mirrored forms. And we've talked about this more deeply in other videos, of course. And if there are questions, bring them up. Kelly will relay them to me as we go. So in that moment of death, which is no more literally one thought to the next, so an infinitesimally small amount of time where the higher self simply takes its attention off the physical vehicle that it had manifested. And there you are in your leftover sense of yourself, because the egoic package of that memory bank, that experience bank, comes with. It doesn't stay in the body. It wasn't a physical thing attached to the brain. I mean, the brain manifested that as a response to the existence of that memory bank, not the other way around. So that memory bank, which was an energetic form and never really physical to start with, okay, and neither is your egoic sense of self. It's not physical, it's an energy form. That leaves with the attention of the higher self. And the first thing that happens, as happened in my case, when I was shot by a sniper, I was a sniper myself. I'd lost that contest and bled out. I was dead for a full 8 minutes. literally collapsed on the doorstep of the jungle hospital after crawling, bleeding out. I have a large wound here on my side to this day, all those years ago. And the first thing you notice is that you're still alive, okay? That actually hits you, that you're still there, and that death hasn't really been anything other than expired vehicle plate on that body down there, and you barely recognize yourself because your sense of self is a lot larger than that. And it takes a little bit of processing to figure, wait a minute, that was me. You really can't identify with it anymore. You really can't. You're already beyond it. Now, this is probably the best moment where we're going to bring up the first question from one of our group members that came by comment. And I'm simply going to read it, and then we're going to discuss it, and then we're going to kind of progress from there, okay? So this group member says, I'd like to know more what happened when you died and what you learned. And that can go on for days. Again, because the experience when you're dead is not time dependent, because time doesn't really exist. So literally, it can feel like 100 years. And in reality, it was, well, in physical reality, it was only 8 minutes, okay? And I really don't differentiate between the two as one being right anymore and one not being right. It's all the point of view. I'm not sure what to think about the whole thing. Who knows? If you haven't had an experience, then what do you have to go on is what others have said, which amounts to many different views. We'll stop there. And, well, we can add, I often think what people say about death is about who is still living, how we make sense of the loss, rather than about death. Very, very good point. And that came from Debbie. Thank you, Debbie, so much. That is a fantastic point. So let's go to the first point. Why are there so many different stories about near-death experiences? Why are they not all exactly the same? Now, that would really seem like a valid question, and I'm not knocking the question. A lot of people have asked that question. It's a great question. Until you understand that in a near-death experience, which are the two that I actually had, you have to come back. Otherwise, it would be just a death experience. It wouldn't be a near-death experience. So since you have to come back, any sort of communication, any sort of imagery, scenery, surroundings is custom tailored to what your ego can communicate with. So in other words, if you've been brought up in the Christian faith, let's say you've been brought up a Catholic your whole life, and you have a near-death experience, it's very likely that you are going to get met by Jesus or by Mother Mary, depending on where you sit, or as far as sort of a deity representation goes. If you were born and bred into a Buddhist community and practiced Buddhism all your life, you'd likely be met by Buddha or one of the other Buddhas, right? Or one of the ascended students of Buddha, like Maitreya, or the Buddha of compassion, right? The Buddha that stems from Gautama to Maitreya and sits in the middle, bringing humanity towards that. That Buddha is Avalokiteshvara. Don't get the two confused. So in other words, it is not only perfectly valid that everyone has a different experience in a near-death experience, but if it wasn't like that, I would highly question the data. So, and you can understand that in that simple example. So, for example, if it turned out that it was really Buddha who was going to be there, the Christian who had the near-death experience would be very confused upon me getting met by Buddha, right? As it is, if you read a lot of near-death interviews or listen to them, as Kelly has done, literally probably thousands of them by now, there are a number of common threads that do come up. Now, one of the things I want to talk here about is about the appearance of hellish or hell-like scenery in those near-death experiences. And again, this comes back to not only collective programming at the genetic level that's passed on generation to generation, right back, really starting up, to be honest, as far as the imagery that has continued on in especially the Western mind, has been Dante's Inferno and everything that came out of Dante's Inferno. The various levels of hell, the demons, the way they looked, the way hell looked. A lot of that has sunk deep into the Western mind through osmosis over the course of these years. You can think of that darkness as part of that egoic sense of self, and but believe it or not, in my first near-death experience, upon realizing that I was out of my body and that my body was no longer useful, I allowed myself to basically turn, but it's more of a magnetic draw that's happening, and you could think of it as being pulled into a vortex. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is you're not actually exiting out of your body. It feels like an out-of-body experience, and we could call it, people reported, well, I've been out of my body and I floated down the hall in the hospital, and yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how you got out. The going out is actually a withdrawing. The only way to describe it dimensionally would be you withdraw from the inside. You actually go into yourself to get out of yourself. You don't go out of yourself to get out of yourself. You go into yourself to get out of yourself. Right into yourself and right through yourself. And you pop out the other side. That's the closest sort of analogy I can get that is closest to the truth and actually makes a lot of sense. So in that state, having that near-death experience, in order for you to grow from that near-death experience, and near-death experiences aren't haphazard, they're not by accident. And we're going to continue that thread about synchronicity and how it happens with the next group members' questions that's come up. But I allowed myself to turn magnetically towards what we could only call a dimensional vortex and literally give approval to get sucked inward, suck deeper within. And the environment that you manifest in on the other side of that portal is an environment that you, as an egoic consciousness memory bank, can accept. Because you planned the break. You planned the near-death encounter. Near-death encounters are like the titanium baseball bat of Shiva swung at you at light speed. There's nothing that will wake a human being up more than that near-death experience. Nothing. So in that near-death experience, you have to have the experience according to your egoic building blocks. Otherwise, it will make no sense to you. You'll have no way to relate it back to others. And even in those cases, there's a lot of things that you'll have to learn to accept. For example, people have met Christ and expected, the European blondish hair sort of guy, white, clearly, and ran into a bedraggled East Indian looking gentleman, right? And been confused at that. So, as I said, in that process of going through that tunnel, for a brief moment, I saw on one side of me long rows of hellish apartment buildings, if you would, all of them in flames, and each one had babbling demons waving and shouting and at me as I literally whipped by in that very short period of space. And I recognized that that was the false sense of myself, all the dark of myself that I never embraced, all the stuff that I held in terrible judgment on myself was all sitting there. And then if I were to look at it or give into it, I would swerve into that area. And that would be the area that I would kind of manifest into in that near-death experience. Now, I never did manifest into that sort of a place of darkness and despair, but other people have, and I've spoken to them. Kelly's listened to them as well. And those people all relay the same thing. In the very instant that you choose not to be there anymore, you're not there. It's not a place you're condemned to. It is not a world that exists per se. It is a manifestation of your egoic consciousness. The larger part of that manifestation, depending on who you are, and in my case, despite the nasty bastard I was at the time, I had a really good manifestation. I was brought into a room with mist for floors and the color beyond the eye. I mean, you know, realistically, our eye only takes in 2% of the light anyways. So you just can't imagine what it's like seeing with the eyes that see all of it. You could stare at it for 1,000 years. It felt like I didn't. It didn't matter. So as Debbie says, you know, that's why there's so many different views. So we've answered that question. So we can go on now, and yes, a lot of the things that people deal with about death are regarding, you know, what's left for the living. And for me, I've come to learn to understand that the only way to truly help the living is to make them understand that death simply doesn't exist. It's not really there. You witness the physical loss of the automobile. But as that lovely poem said, there's nothing that's been missing. There's nothing that's gone. It's all still there, and believe it or not, it's all still communicable. It's all still reachable and feelable and understandable. It truly, truly is. And we can talk about that at another time if anyone needs that. So Louisa asked, do we know when we come and how we're going to go out? And this plays into this whole synchronicity thing and the idea that there is no coincidence. And I got to tell you, there is no such thing as coincidence. And yes, you chose when you were going to come in. Not only that, you chose your parents. Not you today, but the last egoic identity. That's the egoic identity that chose the parents, chose the rough outline of the existence, and you are the magic. You are the unknown. You are the thing that's not planned for. How that egoic consciousness is truly going to manifest itself. Why? Because you have free will. The moment you are born from the last egoic identity as part of the whole of who you are into the new egoic identity that's going to grow, you have free will. Boom. Again. There's a new being, new free will. It's still the same big you, but it's a new little you. I hope that makes sense, because that's the only way I can really get it through to you. So there you are, here in this new unknown egoic development identity that's going to be this new vessel, an empty cup at birth, really. Now, the last egoic identity that you are does plan certain highlights of your existence, but not all of it. Why? Again, because of that free will, and because there really is an unknown to how that egoic identity is going to develop, and yet there's not on one level, okay? But there is an unknown as to how it's going to develop, whether it's going to make it through each lesson or not. Why? Because that's why we're here. This is an amusement park. It wouldn't be fun to go on any ride if you experienced the ride and knew all the turns and twists and everything else before you even got on the ride. The same with a fun house or the scary house or the mad house or the house of mirrors. You don't want to know everything before you go in. You didn't when you wanted to come back here. Why? Because that would ruin the experience. You see, even though you're in basically a memory machine as an egoic identity, this has value. This is perfect in itself. You are perfect right now. And yes, you plan when you come in, and you also plan various exit points. Not usually just one. There's some of them that are kind of like optional. You can think of it. It's like, okay, well, if you've accomplished so much by this time, and you'll be given an opportunity perhaps a near-death experience, and you can choose to check out if you wish, or you can choose to continue on. Now, the first time I died, after what would fill a week worth of talking on a video screen about all the experiences I had, I was let know in no uncertain terms that staying was not an option yet. I wasn't done. I had to return. And yet, it wasn't a forceful, like a hand standing up and saying, get out, it's time to go back. It was more of a admonition. Look deeply within yourself and you have to go back. And that's exactly what I did and realized. And I woke back in my body, back in that form that I had taken, surrounded by people congratulating themselves. The second experience was a little different than that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we answer another question here. So, meaning, do we choose what experiences we are to have? Okay, so in essence, we don't choose all the experiences. We choose the highlights. We choose the interactivities, I guess you will, and the rest. It's like going to Disneyland, where there's certain shows at certain times that you're going to choose to go to or not to, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of just up in the air of what you can do in between all that. That's really what humanity is all about down here. It really is. It's meant to be more of an amusement park than a problem. It really is. So, in my second near-death experience, and there are a few things I want to talk about that happened during that experience that may shed a little bit more light on death as well. Uh, it is worth noting, though, that in my first near-death experience, I was gunning for God. I didn't give a rat's ass about dying. The last words on my own lips were, I'm coming for you, And that all stemmed to what the Catholic Church had done to my mother after my mother committed suicide after years of suffering and extreme pain, right? And mental anguish and physical anguish. None of that goes with you. None of that egoic part of yourself, that desire to take God out or anything related to those sort of negative things. None of that actually comes with you when you cross over that line, if you will, okay? And that's why people who have an NDE, when they come back, they never pick that up again because they didn't take it over there with them and they were free of it during their NDE. And the information they receive and integrate back into here changes them profoundly forever, as it did myself. It truly, truly does. So in my second near-death experience, of course, the apparent time I was dead was 11 minutes at the minimum. I fell from an altitude of nearly 5 miles with a dysfunctional pack that failed to open after a night halo jump. I hit the Indian Ocean at terminal velocity. I somehow swam to shore, apparently, and died on the beach. Oh, and I managed to radio in on a sat phone as well, which I no knowledge of. So in that experience, literally the same thing happened. I was looking at myself laying there on the beach, broken wreck, half the bones of my body turned to mush. and contusions all over myself, and it didn't really matter to me. It didn't. And I was quick, now that I knew where to go, to turn my attention toward that dimensional gateway and cross over into that magnificent space. No matter what you manifest on the other side of that dimensional gateway, you need to understand it's you that's manifesting it. The big you. It's manifesting it for the egoic identity, the little you that you are, so that the frame of reference is manageable, so that you can understand what's happening. And then over time, depending on how long or deep your near-death experience is, and when we hear people who talk, who channel people from beyond the grave, they report how there's a gradual adding to of knowledge so that the new reality is allowed to become available without a little bit of a trauma happening with the sudden realization that, well, this is the only way I can say it. Okay, if you take Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad and Gandhi and put them all in a room, none of them are there. That's really the only way I can say it. Why? Because they're all manifestations themselves. That's why anyone who's already passed through that dimensional gateway is available to us at any time. In the act of thinking about them, the entirety of the energy that was them is right there beside you, right there with you, surrounding you, vibrating in harmony with your thoughts about them, available for you to communicate with. So when I died the second time, I didn't see fields or trees initially. It was more of a citadel. I would say it was definitely more round, more Gothic Roman, maybe, but magnificent in grandeur, and yet very close and comfortable at the same time. And surrounding me between each pillar were a series of 12 beings. And they were all smiling at me, and they were communicating with me without talking, and I was communicating with them without talking. And part of that conversation is that I had done everything I had chosen to do. I'd actually completed the tasks and the adventures and the experiences that were set out before my birth for this life. I'd done it. And now I could truly choose, but of my own free will. Do I stay or do I go now? Sounds like a song. I can't say that on the fully conscious level I really wanted to go back. But at the same time, I knew there was so much more. And the last of the fears had evaporated. There was nothing else to worry about ever again. So yeah, I chose to come back on one level, but on the more conscious level, no, I didn't. And when my heart was shocked and I started having a pulse again, and I came back into consciousness, I had tears running down my face. And the major, the surgeon, gave me a really odd look and asked me what I was crying about. And I said, you know, they just saved my life. And I said, you know, I didn't have to come back. And I was really struggling with that. And trust me, those weren't conversations you could have in a military hospital. You know, just had this great near-death experience. And yes, you do pick up so much. And I could talk to you for days about that, but that's not the important thing right now. And as a matter of fact, I don't think that really matters because you're going to have your own experiences one way or the other. This is what really matters. Is that label is just bullshit. It's literally one thought to the next, and you are not dead. There's nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. please, let me repeat that one more time. There is nothing to fear but fear itself. Death is a graduation ceremony. If you have a near-death experience, then you needed it. And it is life-saving, literally. And you have to think about that one for a minute. But when you have your death experience, when it's time, when you're done here, you've graduated. You've done everything you needed and more. It's time to go home, although you've never left home. It's more correct to say it's time to get another point of view on life. And trust me, in the moment you pass over, and I know this is going to be hard to accept, you think you're going to be upset and caring about what happens to all the other humans here, including all the ones you love. You're going to drop that in a heartbeat. You're going to drop all of that in a heartbeat. Why? Because you're going to know the truth for your own self, that there is nothing ever to worry about and everything is perfectly okay in every single moment of every single day. This is the message that death is offering us. Now, again, as we've just talked about before, I have a deep compassion and love for every last one of you. And it's our choice. We can choose how we get to our new world. You know, we can kick and scream and fight and beat each other up and kill each other and treat each other badly and continue to play this capitalist money game. Or we can choose a new path to a new world. But one of the places we have to start with is losing that fear of death. Now, losing the fear of death has nothing to do with being stupid with your life. And please forgive me for the use of that word, but I mean to accentuate the importance of which this is. Your existence is a precious gift. And it is not your existence. I know you'd like to think it's your existence, and it sure supports an ego to know, hey, this is my life. It is your life, and yet it's not your life. Why? Because it's one creative being, that one creator manifesting all of life. Every last bit of it. You're really along for the ride. So what could there be to worry about? It appears that God destroys God. Man kills man. Man burns trees, kills animals. Asteroids smash together. Supernovas consume planets. Black holes are born, consuming all things, including light itself. Not really, again, but we'll leave the physics lesson for later. And yet, the destruction and creation are both necessary aspects of this physical universe. We are born here into a world of relativity. The truth has nothing to do with relativity. Relatively is a universal issue. That's a good physics joke, believe it or not. At a physical universe level, relativity is a universal issue. Relativity is all about the fact that it's duality. You always have to have something in order to know something. You have to be able to see the duality. In order to know cold, you have to have hot. In order to experience up, you have to have down. In order to live life, you have to begin by fearing death. Or at least knowing you're going to die. Anything that is dualistic is unreal. Therefore, your birth and death are an apparent birth and death. That which you truly are is eternal. Trust me, It's experienced life and death over and over again in many different ways and forms and will to for eternity. Why? Because life has no end game. You don't want it. And this is another thing that was made crystal clear to me in my first and my second near-death experience. You know, I kid you not, I still do to this day, on occasion, sit in a pub with Christ and we talk and we have a beer together, which is really funny because I don't drink beer in the physical world, but I have a beer with him. And in my second near-death experience, I met Christ at that time too. And he and I talked at length. And he gave me so much information through asking me questions and forcing me to look at the answers to them and realize that they were already there. They were already all apparent. You have no beginning. You have no end. You are an eternal manifestation. And the thing that he made crystal clear to me and was made clear in both experiences is that none of us would really want an end to it. There's no place to get to where you're going to sit on your ass in some big mansion looking out at a perfect field or walking on gold streets. I mean, you'll be able to manifest those if you want for yourself, but you're not going to want to. Trust me. Here's the reason why. Just imagine for a minute. If all you're going to do is sit there and worship some deity or kneel on gold streets or walk around a park, what do you think's going to happen to you in 1,000 years? Or 10,000 years? Or 100,000 years? Or 1,000,000 years? You're going to go right off your rocker and wish for death. But you won't get it. That's not the way this works. You are going to come back here to play over and over and over again in ever higher evolving consciousness and form. We were there in the Neanderthal. We were there at the birth of creation. The moment this universe sprang into existence, all of us were there. And we're going to be here long after. This is the truth. This is the magic of this existence. Yes, as I still do from time to time, allow yourself to get caught up in the play. Allow yourself to be taken by the concept that this is it. And relish in that. Use that to live life to its fullest. For it is a gift. And when you've used up this egoic identity enough, when enough has been accomplished, when you've crossed that line you wanted to, you will leave in your own way. And it too will be perfect. I know of no person who's had a near-death experience who I've ever communicated with. And as I've had my own, I used to be members of bulletin board groups way back in the early days of the internet before the fully functional video interfaces and the like this. Everyone says the same thing. Even if you're at pain up to the moment of death, death is not painful. Death is one of the most joyous, relaxing, immense experiences you will ever have. The thing I struggle with these days is you can almost look forward to that day. Because you know what's there. You know what's waiting. And you know, if you've spent the last 2.5 years with me, or if this is your first time with me, I just want you to look deep in my eyes and listen closely. It's okay. There's nothing to worry about. There is no one lost. No one. That's it. That's all tonight. I hope I've brought a little light into the subject. I hope I've brought a little awareness into how things kind of work. and an understanding about why there's such varied experience. And you know, they recently looked at just the text of all the people who had near-death experience, and what they found out was there was a very high correlation of words like joyous and peaceful and calming and wonderful and magical and life-changing. So you can think of death not as an end, but as a change, just as you've changed all your life, from little tiny child to an adult and beyond. Much love. Namaste. I love you with all my heart. Take care and have a beautiful Tuesday night.